For this Alteryx Weekly Challenge, we're using some reporting tools and reshaping our data a little bit. So let's look at our three different outputs that we're aiming for, first of all. So we're looking to create this bar chart that just gives us the magnitude and the number of earthquakes at that magnitude. Fairly straightforward. Then we're looking to create a little map that shows us the location of all those earthquakes and categorizes them by their magnitude. And then finally, we just want to create this little table down here, which gives us the top 5 countries or regions where earthquakes have occurred in that time and some information about those earthquakes. So for part 1, then what we're going to do is we're going to use the summarize tool first of all to group by the magnitude, and we're just counting the distinct time. I thought that would be a good unique identifier. We get this little warning for us about group bys on double or floats aren't recommended, but we did it anyway because we're naughty. I could have changed it to a fixed decimal first of all, maybe, but oh well, it works. So we need an interactive chart tool for this one. So if you haven't used one of these before, you always need to start by adding a layer. Then you change the type of chart you're trying to build to whichever one you're trying to build. In this case, we're trying to build a bar chart. And then we get our x-axes and our y-axes. So for the x-axis, that's going to be our magnitude. For our y-axis, it's going to be our count that we've just created in the summarize. So we want to go ahead, and I removed the legend myself because I thought it was pretty useless. So I just chose to hide that. Then I went to the axes and I thought I'd change the headers there from mag to magnitude for the x-axis, and then change the y-axis to count. And then I wanted there to be a title above my entire chart, so I went to the chart and scrolled down, and there's a title here. So just named it something sensible like this. And then really counterintuitively, you just close this window, and then when you press run, it will appear in your browse tool. It always feels worrying that you've done all those changes and then you have to close it, and you just kind of cross your fingers and hope that it works, but luckily it works. So now we're coming on to part 2, that map. So before we can create a map, we need a spatial field to work with, so we just use a create points tool first of all. Then we're using our report map from the reporting tool palette again. And again, this is a super fun one to configure. So we go to the data tab first of all. So we go to the number 1. So that's referring to this connection that's coming from the create points tool, because you can have multiple tools feeding into this report map. We choose our spatial field, so it doesn't really matter too much when we've only got one spatial field, but I still like to do it, so we choose our centroid. And then we want to choose a thematic field. So our magnitude is our thematic field. It controls the colour across all those different marks that we see on our map, so classifying them by their magnitude in a color gradient, I can't think of the word I mean, a continuous color palette is basically what I mean, or a diverging one. We choose that later. So then we come on to our layers, and we need to make sure that we add in a points layer from our number 1 connection, and then that creates this little diamond here, this blue diamond that says #1. We go and control the style, so we want to change the point style to be a triangle. So anytime we tick this box here, it gives us a drop-down menu. So we can just choose triangle from there. And then our theme comes around because we set up in our data tab that thematic field. So we want to set up to equal ranges so that it matches how it's set up in the example output. So I had to kind of go and look at that and see how that was set up to try and work that out, but I could see that every range was 1.7 or 0.17 apart, and I could see they had 10 tiles, 10 different marks in their legend, so I used that here. And then we just want to change the start and the end color so that it matches the example. I would suggest that probably I would have switched that around and had the end color being red, because red is more severe earthquakes, but whatever, I probably wouldn't be using a diverging color palette if I was creating this myself anyway, so I just did it to match the output. And then in our legend, we just want that to come and sit on the left-hand side rather than on the right, so we just change it from layout to the right to layout to the left. And then that all works. Don't worry, when I was creating this, I didn't do all those changes at once. There were many different runs so that I could have a look and see, and then go back and compare it to the required output. But yeah, I know that my map isn't as big as their map. My legend's possibly a little bit bigger, but I decided that that was enough for me to consider this challenge complete. And then the third part, we're trying to find out which countries or regions had the most earthquakes in this time period. So to do that, we need to look at the place field, and we can see in the place field we've got quite a lot of detail, usually then a comma and then a country or a region. Sometimes we don't get that much detail about it, so we might just have the location, but even so, we're going to split on the comma delimiter. This isn't a foolproof way of doing it, as you'll see, but it does allow us to isolate those more common regions. So for now, I'm saying it's good enough. And then so this creates quite a lot of nulls for us. So for example, for the South Indian Ocean, we get a null. So we're going to go and make sure that any of those nulls are replaced by place 1. So for South Indian Ocean, it's just going to appear there. We can see we've also got leading spaces, so we'll just trim that place 2 as well. And then finally, we've got, say, for example, Indonesia, which is just a country name. Then we've got India region, so we're just going to remove the word region so that it's just India. And so just doing a replace of the word region with nothing there as well, so that if there was India listed anywhere, for example, it would be able to group those together. Okay, so then we're using a summarize tool to group by that place 2 and count distinct time again, and then sorting those into a descending order and taking only the first 5 rows. So we have the 5 most common areas for earthquakes. Joining that back to our data just before our summarize tool, so we just keep those 5 countries' earthquake information, and then we're grouping by those countries, grouping by the number of events because we've already worked out the total number of events before, so we're just keeping that information in there, and then doing the min and the max magnitude. Then our final thing that we need to get is the most common day for each of those regions. I'm sure there's probably a quicker way of doing this, but this is the way that I came up with. So we're going to that time field, and as you can see here, it has sort of the year, the month, the day, and then a capital T, and then the hour, the minute, the second, and then the milliseconds as well, and a capital Z. And I didn't know how to deal with the milliseconds in the date time tool, so I just decided to split it off. So with this text to columns tool, I've just got the milliseconds over here abandoned. I could even have split it on the T, couldn't I, and just had the year, day, month, because we don't need any information about the time. So I could have just done that, but oh well, that's what I did anyway. And then there we go, we just have that format there of the year, month, day, capital T, hour, minute, seconds, so that it converts into a date time, so that we can then use the date time tool again in the opposite way around to convert a date time into a string, and just say that we want the day to come out of that. And then very similar process to earlier, we just want to group by the country, group by the day, and count the distinct number of rows. Sort those for each country in a descending order by that count, and then take only the first row, so we can see the most common day for each of our countries there. Okay, then we just join that back together with that information, get rid of any fields we don't need, and then I decided to sort it in descending order to make it easier to compare to the output. And that's our challenge. So thank you very much for watching. I hope you found that useful.